In 1980, 4 nuns disappeared. In 2008, a vent was found. The voice coming from inside solved a 28-year mystery. When the stage lights went out, no one believed Father Marcus. His sister Catherine was only 23 years old. In northern Oregon, at a small chapel, she had gone for an ordinary monastery retreat. She was never seen again. At that moment, Father Marcus didn't know that the answers he would search for 28 years would be waiting right beneath the chapel. When everyone's false security collapsed, only the earth would reveal its true face. 4 nuns had vanished all at once. The elderly sisters Margaret and Rose, young sister Beatrice, and the youngest, Father Marcus's sister Catherine. There were no traces, no blood, no signs of struggle, as if they had been erased from the earth. This story isn't just about missing nuns. This is the story of how the people we trust most can hide the darkest secrets, and sometimes the truth is so close that to find it, you just need to look in the right place. The morning light filtering through the stained glass windows of Sacred Heart Church cast colorful patterns across the polished wooden pews. Father Marcus Vale stood at the altar, his voice solemn yet steady. For 28 years, every March 12th morning, he would stand here and say the same prayer. May the souls of the departed rest in peace through God's mercy, he concluded the service. The congregation responded in unison, Amen. But this time, Father Marcus's heart was restless, because the dream he had last night wouldn't leave his mind. His sister Catherine, in her white dress, waving at him from afar, and her lips were moving, as if trying to say something. When the service ended, congregation members spoke with Father Marcus one by one as they left. Thank you for coming, Father, said elderly Mrs. Patterson, clasping her wrinkled hands in the priest's. I still remember Sister Margaret teaching my children their catechism. What a gentle soul she was. Father Marcus nodded, feeling the familiar pang of sorrow. Sister Margaret Hayes was 68 when she disappeared. A lifetime devoted to God, cut short by whatever tragedy they had faced. But this year was different. This year, the voice inside him was stronger. When the last congregation member left, Father Marcus slowly walked to his private office at the back of the church. The modestly furnished room, a simple desk, shelves full of theology books, a window overlooking the church cemetery. Alone at last, he sank into his chair and buried his face in his hands. The composed facade he maintained for his congregation crumbled away, leaving only a man consumed by grief and unanswered questions. Why, Lord, he whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. I have served you faithfully all these years. My sister dedicated her life to you. Why haven't you led me to them? Tears leaked between his fingers as his shoulders shook with silent sobs. He rarely allowed himself this moment of weakness, but the anniversary always stripped away his carefully constructed defenses. After several minutes, he drew a deep breath and wiped his eyes. He opened the bottom drawer of his desk and removed a small wooden box. Inside lay several photographs preserved with loving care, despite the passage of years. The first was of Catherine on the day she took her final vows. Her young face beamed with joy and purpose beneath her veil. Father Marcus felt both pride and a stab of guilt as he gazed at the image. He had been the one to nurture her faith, to encourage her vocation. He still remembered their conversations when she was just 16, her eyes alight with conviction as she spoke of her calling. I was so proud of you, he murmured to the photograph. I still am. The thought that had haunted him for 28 years crept into his mind. If he hadn't encouraged her religious vocation, would she still be here today? A mother, a teacher, alive and healthy. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, he said sharply, crossing himself to banish the treacherous thought. He could not allow himself to question God's plan, even in his darkest moments. Setting aside Catherine's photograph, he reached for another. This was the last known image of the 4 missing nuns. They sat together on a wooden bench outside the small remote St. Benedict's chapel near the edge of Mount Hood National Forest. Sisters Margaret and Rose, the eldest, sat with their hands folded placidly in their laps, their lined faces serene. Sister Beatrice sat beside them, her posture more relaxed, but her expression reverent, and beside her was Catherine, the youngest, her eyes bright with purpose even in the faded photograph. The photograph had been taken by a local visitor just days before the nuns disappeared. They had traveled to St. Benedict's Chapel for a short spiritual retreat. 2 days of fasting, prayer and silence before the feast of a Catholic saint. The diocese had also tasked them with assessing the old chapel's condition to determine whether it should be restored or decommissioned. Sister Catherine, with her eye for detail, had been asked to document the state of the structure. Father Marcus stared at the image, his mind drifting to calculations he'd made countless times before. Sister Margaret would be 96 now, Sister Rose 93. Even if by some miracle they had survived whatever befell them, they would be frail, elderly women. But Beatrice would be 56, and Catherine just 51, still potentially in the prime of life. This thought gave him both hope and pain. He remembered the frantic days and weeks after their disappearance. The police had searched the forest extensively, combing through underbrush and scaling the nearby mountainsides. Search parties had spread out through surrounding farms, villages, and towns. Volunteers had searched for days. The FBI had even come. Private detectives were hired. But not a single clue had emerged. No scraps of clothing, no personal effects, no signs of struggle. The 4 women had simply vanished into thin air. The official theory had eventually settled on a bear attack. The Mount Hood National Forest was known for its wildlife, including black bears that could become aggressive if threatened. Perhaps the sisters had wandered too far into the woods and encountered a predator. But the complete absence of evidence had always made this explanation feel hollow to Father Marcus and many others as well. Over the years, uglier rumors had circulated. Whispers that the nuns had abandoned their vows and run away to start new lives. Father Marcus and the church had worked tirelessly to quash such speculation, but the seeds of doubt had been planted in the community nonetheless. Catherine would never have done that, he whispered. Tracing his sister's face in the photograph, he continued. She would never have left without telling me. She was so faithful, so devoted. Something happened to them, but what? As he continued to gaze at the photograph, his eyes drifted to the chapel in the background. St. Benedict's had been a simple structure constructed in the 1920s to serve the scattered Catholic population in the area. Its white walls and modest bell tower were visible behind the nuns, surrounded by the looming trees of the forest edge. Something tugged at Father Marcus's heart as he studied the building. He hadn't visited St. Benedict's in over 20 years, finding the memories too painful to bear. But now, on this anniversary, he felt a strange urge to see it again, to walk where his sister had walked, to pray where she had prayed. Perhaps it was mere sentimentality, a desire to feel close to Catherine on this difficult day. Or perhaps a small voice whispered in the back of his mind. There was still something to be discovered there, some clue overlooked in the initial investigation. This latter thought was almost certainly foolish. What could possibly remain to be found after 28 years? Yet the pull was undeniable. Father Marcus carefully replaced the photographs in the box, except for the one of the 4 nuns at St. Benedict's, which he slipped into his pocket. He rose from his desk, collected his Bible and rosary, and left his office with purpose in his stride. In the church parking lot, he slid behind the wheel of his modest sedan, placed the photograph on the passenger seat beside him, and said a brief prayer for guidance. Then he turned the key in the ignition and pulled away from Sacred Heart, heading toward the forest and the ghosts of his past. But he didn't know that this journey would change his life forever. The winding road leading from Millbrook to the Mount Hood National Forest carried Father Marcus through changing landscapes. The town's neat houses and businesses gave way to scattered farms, which eventually surrendered to the encroaching wilderness. Tall pines and cedars crowded the roadside, their shadows dappling the asphalt as he drove. The journey took approximately an hour and a half, giving Father Marcus ample time to reflect. He found himself recalling the numerous times he had made the same drive in the weeks following the nun's disappearance. Back then, his car had been filled with missing person flyers bearing Catherine's face, and his heart had been buoyed by desperate hope. He looked under every tree, into every bush, hoping for a clue. Now he carried only memories and resigned acceptance of the mystery that had shaped his life. As the road narrowed and began to climb into the foothills, Father Marcus slowed his vehicle. St. Benedict's Chapel had been situated on a small clearing near the forest edge, accessible via a modest dirt road that branched off from the main highway. He scanned the roadside, looking for the familiar turnoff. When he reached what he believed to be the correct location, Father Marcus frowned in confusion. Instead of the simple dirt path he remembered, he found a paved private road blocked by an ornate gate. A no trespassing sign was displayed alongside smaller notices warning of private property. "This can't be right," he muttered, pulling his car to the side of the road. He consulted the photograph he had brought, comparing the background landscape to what he could see from his position. The mountains in the distance matched, as did the particular arrangement of taller trees on the ridgeline. This was indeed the correct location, but where was St. Benedict's Chapel? Father Marcus exited his vehicle and approached the gate on foot. Beyond it, he could see the private road stretching into the forest, but there was no sign of the White Chapel building. Instead, the area appeared to have been extensively landscaped with ornamental trees and shrubs lining the driveway. Bewildered, he reached for his cell phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found the number for Walter Morrison, the longtime caretaker of St. Benedict's. They hadn't spoken in years, but Father Marcus hoped the man might still be in the area and able to provide some explanation. "Walter, this is Father Marcus Vale from Sacred Heart in Millbrook." A pause, then recognition. "Father Marcus, it's been quite some time. How are you?" "I'm well, thank you." "Walter, I'm standing at what I believe to be the entrance to St. Benedict's, but the chapel appears to be gone." Another pause, longer this time. "That's right, Father. The diocese decommissioned the chapel years ago. It was sold in 1982 to a man named Victor Blackwood. He demolished it." This information shook Father Marcus's world. Despite the warmth of the day, he felt a chill. "I never heard anything about the chapel being sold, let alone demolished. Why didn't anyone inform me?" "Well, after what happened with the nuns, attendance dropped off significantly. Then there was that incident with the bell tower cracking and nearly injuring poor Timothy Wells," Walter continued. "The bishop decided it wasn't worth the upkeep for such a small congregation." "I'm sorry, Father. They should have contacted you." Father Marcus found himself staring at the no trespassing sign with growing unease. "This Victor Blackwood, does he still own the property?" "Oh yes," Walter confirmed. "He's got quite a spread back there. His main house is a ways in, near where the forest gets thicker. The chapel site is just part of his estate now." After receiving directions from Walter, Father Marcus thanked him and ended the call. He returned to his car, torn between returning to Millbrook and stopping at Walter Morrison's home as the man had invited him to do. But a stronger impulse propelled him toward the public road that would lead to Blackwood's estate. The voice inside him had grown even stronger. It was as if Catherine was whispering to him, "Don't give up, Marcus. Find the truth." 20 minutes later, Father Marcus found himself driving along a narrow lane that skirted the edge of what must have been Blackwood's property. Through gaps in the trees, he caught glimpses of manicured grounds and eventually a substantial structure that resembled a mountain lodge. More than a conventional house, the building was impressive. 3 stories of natural stone and timber with expansive windows and multiple terraces overlooking the forest. It spoke of wealth that seemed at odds with the modest rural surroundings. Father Marcus located a small parking area near what appeared to be a service entrance to the property. He parked his car, straightened his clerical collar, and approached the imposing residence with a mixture of determination and apprehension. As he neared the front entrance, a stone pathway led him past carefully tended gardens and a small decorative pond. The craftsmanship of the place was undeniable, yet Father Marcus couldn't help but feel a sense of disquiet. He stepped up to the front door and knocked firmly on the heavy oak panel. The door swung open almost immediately, revealing a tall, athletic man in his 60s, dressed in expensive exercise attire. His silver hair was neatly trimmed, and in one hand he held a leather dog leash. The man's expression shifted from neutral expectation to unmistakable displeasure as he registered Father Marcus's clerical attire. There was something in his eyes, a kind of fear? "Yes?" he asked, not bothering to disguise the impatience in his tone. "Good afternoon," Father Marcus said with a warm smile. "Are you Mr. Victor Blackwood?" The man's jaw tightened, his fingers clenched around the dog leash. "I am, and you are trespassing on private property." The hostility was immediately apparent. "I apologize for arriving unannounced. My name is Father Marcus Vale from Sacred Heart Church in Millbrook." He extended his hand, but Victor Blackwood made no move to take it. "What do you want?" he demanded harshly. Father Marcus lowered his hand, maintaining his calm demeanor despite the hostility. "I was hoping I might have a few minutes of your time. You see, I visited the site where St. Benedict's Chapel used to stand, and I was surprised to find it gone. If you already saw it's not there, why come bothering me?" Blackwood's voice had taken on an edge that was almost a snarl. His dog was also beginning to get restless. "I spoke with Walter Morrison, the former caretaker. He mentioned you had purchased the property. I simply wanted to understand the circumstances." "What? Blame me for buying land that was for sale?" Blackwood stepped forward aggressively, causing Father Marcus to take an involuntary step back. "Are you one of those who thinks that ground is somehow sacred? The diocese didn't think so when they sold it." The man's reaction was too violent, as if he had something to hide. "No, no," Father Marcus said quickly, raising his hands in a placating gesture. "I don't blame you at all. I was just curious about the circumstances. The chapel held personal significance for me, and I wasn't aware it had been demolished." Blackwood seemed momentarily mollified, though his expression remained cold. "Well, now you know. It's gone, and good riddance." Then he added, "I sleep better now that I don't have to hear that blasted bell ringing 3 times a day and giving me migraines." These words surprised Father Marcus. The hatred was so deep. "The Angelus bell is a beautiful tradition, Mr. Blackwood. It calls the faithful to recite the Lord's Prayer and honors the incarnation of God. It's meant to be a reminder of holy things, of our freedom from sin and death." "Oh, spare me the sermon," Blackwood scoffed, anger flashing in his eyes. "People can set alarms on their phones if they need reminding to pray. They don't need to disturb the entire countryside with medieval noise pollution." The conversation was clearly not progressing in a positive direction. Father Marcus decided to try a different approach. "I understand you value your privacy, Mr. Blackwood, and I've intruded on your time. I apologize for that. Perhaps we could speak another day when it's more convenient for you." "There won't be another day," Blackwood said flatly, his voice threatening. "I have no interest in discussing a building that hasn't existed for decades with a priest I've never met before. Now, I suggest you leave before I call the sheriff and report you for trespassing." Blackwood's only response was to close the door firmly in his face. The encounter had left him feeling both disappointed and unsettled. There was something in Blackwood's manner beyond mere rudeness, a deeper antipathy toward the church and its representatives, almost a pathological hatred. When he reached his vehicle, Father Marcus glanced back at the imposing house. Was it merely his imagination, or was Blackwood watching him from one of the upper windows? The sensation of being observed prickled at the back of his neck. As he drove away from Blackwood's estate, Father Marcus found himself taking the road that would pass near the former site of the chapel. He couldn't explain the compulsion. After all, he now knew there was nothing to see, but something drew him back in that direction. The voice inside him had grown even stronger. The car rounded a bend, bringing him within view of the approximate location where St. Benedict's had once stood. Through a gap in the trees, he could make out a cleared area where the small building had been, now landscaped with ornamental shrubs. Suddenly, the car's radio crackled to life, emitting a strange, haunting sound. Father Marcus started, his hands tightening on the steering wheel. The sound was unmistakable. Gregorian chant, the ancient ethereal music of monastic worship, but the radio was off. He distinctly remembered turning it off when he left Millbrook. Father Marcus pulled the car to the side of the road and stared at the radio in bewilderment. The chanting continued for several seconds, then faded away as abruptly as it had begun. "What on earth?" he murmured, reaching out to touch the radio dial. He turned it on and then off again, but the mysterious chanting did not return. Had he imagined it? A trick of an exhausted mind, perhaps, or some strange electrical malfunction in his aging vehicle. Yet, as he sat there, a peculiar sensation washed over him, the same feeling he had experienced earlier while looking at the photograph in his office. A tugging at his heart, an inexplicable certainty that he was meant to be here, now, for a purpose he did not yet understand. The hair on his arms stood on end, and a warmth spread through his ears, physical sensations he had experienced before in moments of intense prayer or spiritual insight. His spiritual director in seminary had taught him to recognize these as potential movements of the Holy Spirit. Once more, faint chanting emanated from the silent radio, and this time Father Marcus was certain he wasn't imagining it. It was as if an otherworldly voice was calling to him, guiding him. Without fully understanding his own actions, Father Marcus executed a careful U-turn and drove back toward the gate that blocked access to the former chapel site. Whatever was happening, he felt compelled to investigate further, even if it meant risking another confrontation with the unwelcoming Victor Blackwood. Inside him, Catherine's voice seemed to whisper, "You're getting close, brother. Don't give up now." Father Marcus parked his car on the side of the road near the gate that marked the entrance to Victor Blackwood's property. The no trespassing signs loomed before him, their warnings clear and unambiguous. He sat for a moment, hands still on the steering wheel, questioning the wisdom of what he was contemplating. "Lord, guide my actions," he whispered. "If I am about to err in judgment, show me the right path." But the spiritual prompting persisted, and after a final moment of hesitation, Father Marcus exited his vehicle. He approached the gate cautiously, fully aware that he was considering trespassing on private property, an action difficult to reconcile with his moral obligations as a priest. Yet the mysterious chanting from his radio had awakened something in him, a conviction that transcended ordinary concerns. Rather than attempting to breach the gate itself, Father Marcus began to walk along the perimeter fence, seeking a vantage point from which to view the former chapel site. The fence was substantial, 8 feet of ornate but sturdy metal, but it followed the contours of the uneven forest terrain, occasionally dipping closer to the ground where the land rose beneath it. As he walked, Father Marcus closed his eyes briefly, trying to visualize the layout of St. Benedict's as it had once been. If his memory served him correctly, the wooden bench where the nuns had been photographed had stood to the east of the chapel near a large oak tree. Opening his eyes, he scanned the property beyond the fence, attempting to locate landmarks that might have survived the demolition. The oak tree was gone, presumably removed during Blackwood's renovations, but a cluster of pines that had stood behind the chapel remained, providing a reference point. Father Marcus continued along the fence line, moving toward the area where he believed the chapel had stood. As he walked, his foot suddenly caught on an exposed tree root, sending him stumbling forward. He reached out to catch himself, his hands grasping the metal fence, but the momentum of his fall caused his weight to press against a section where the fence posts were set in uneven ground. There was a sharp cracking sound as the weakened joint of the fence gave way, creating a gap large enough for a person to squeeze through. Father Marcus found himself sprawled partially onto Blackwood's property, the broken section of fence beneath him. "Oh dear Lord," he muttered, picking himself up and brushing soil from his clothes. He had not intended to damage the fence, let alone create a means of entry onto the private land. Yet here he was, faced with an unexpected opportunity or temptation. Father Marcus glanced back toward the road, ensuring no one had witnessed his accidental vandalism. The area was deserted, the only sound the rustling of leaves in the afternoon breeze. He looked down at the broken fence, then at the clearing beyond where St. Benedict had once stood. "Forgive me," he whispered, crossing himself before carefully stepping through the gap in the fence. The voice inside him had grown even stronger. It was as if Catherine was guiding him. Once on Blackwood's property, Father Marcus moved swiftly but cautiously toward the former chapel site. The area had been landscaped with non-native ornamental plants that seemed out of place against the backdrop of the natural forest. Nothing remained to indicate that a place of worship had ever existed here. No foundation stones, no cross, no memorial of any kind. The absence struck Father Marcus as particularly sad. It was as if Victor Blackwood had deliberately erased all traces of the chapel's existence, removing not just the building, but its very memory from the land. As he stood contemplating this, a flash of reflected light caught his eye. Something near the ground, partially hidden by decorative shrubbery. Curious, Father Marcus moved closer and parted the branches, revealing a metal grate set into the earth, an air vent of some kind. It appeared old and weathered, its iron bars rusted with age. Father Marcus frowned, perplexed. If the chapel had been completely demolished, why would an old air vent remain? And why would a landscaped area with no structures need ventilation at all? He crouched beside the vent, examining it more closely. The design was vintage, possibly dating back to the 1930s or 40s, with ornate scrollwork around its edges. It seemed incongruous with the modern minimalist aesthetic of Blackwood's property. As he leaned closer, a sound drifted up through the grate, so faint that at first Father Marcus thought he had imagined it. But then it came again, a soft, melodic humming, and then what was clearly a human cough. Father Marcus's blood ran cold. The humming was reminiscent of the Gregorian chant he had heard on his car radio, but this was no electrical glitch or figment of his imagination. Someone was below ground beneath what had once been St. Benedict's chapel. "Hello," he called softly through the grate, but the humming continued uninterrupted, suggesting the person couldn't hear him from their subterranean location. Father Marcus straightened up, his mind racing. The implications were disturbing. Why would there be an underground space beneath the former chapel site? And more importantly, who was down there? The worst possibility came to mind. Could there be a connection to the nuns who disappeared 28 years ago? He looked around, half expecting to see Victor Blackwood approaching with fury in his eyes, but the property remained quiet and apparently unmonitored, at least in this section. The main house was hidden from view by a stand of trees, and no security cameras were visible in the immediate vicinity. Drawing his cell phone from his pocket, Father Marcus dialed 911, his hand trembling slightly as he raised the device to his ear. 911, what's your emergency? My name is Father Marcus Vale, he said, keeping his voice low despite the apparent solitude. I'm at the property of Victor Blackwood, near the former site of St. Benedict's Chapel, off Route 26. I believe someone may be trapped underground. I can hear singing and coughing coming from an air vent. There was a brief silence on the other end. Sir, are you saying you suspect someone is being held against their will? I don't know, Father Marcus admitted, but there appears to be an underground space of some kind, and someone is definitely down there. Given the remote location and the fact that this property is private, I'm concerned. Are you on the property legally, sir? The dispatcher asked, a note of skepticism entering her voice. Father Marcus winced. I accidentally damaged a section of fence and found myself on the property. I realize I'm trespassing, but this seemed like an emergency situation. After ending the call, he felt an urgent need. He called Walter Morrison again. Walter, this is Father Marcus again. I need to ask you something important. When St. Benedict's was still standing, was there any kind of basement or underground room beneath it? Walter sounded surprised by the question. No, Father, the chapel was built on a simple slab foundation. No basement, no crypt, nothing like that. I maintained that property for 20 years. I would know, Father Marcus explained what he had discovered. That's impossible, Walter said firmly. There was never any underground structure at St. Benedict's. Then the only explanation is that someone built it after the chapel was demolished, Father Marcus concluded, when Victor Blackwood took ownership. That's disturbing, Walter admitted. What are you going to do? I've already called the police. They're sending officers to investigate. I'll come too, Walter decided. I know that property better than anyone. I can be there in 10 minutes. Soon the police arrived. 2 officers emerged, one older with graying hair at his temples, the other younger and lean, Officer Thompson and Officer Davis. Father Marcus explained the situation. Walter arrived too. They examined the air vent. This is old craftsmanship, said Thompson. Doesn't match the modern landscaping at all. Then they all listened. First silence, then faintly but distinctly, a woman's voice began to hum. Salve Regina, Thompson whispered. The humming continued for several more seconds, then faded, replaced by the sound of labored breathing and a dry, rasping cough. There's definitely someone down there, Davis said seriously, and from the sound of that cough, they may need medical attention. We need to speak with Mr. Blackwood immediately, Thompson decided. When they confronted Blackwood at his house, the man was furious. This is outrageous, he shouted. This priest is making wild accusations. But the officers insisted and eventually obtained a search warrant. They investigated Blackwood's storage building. One officer dropped a heavy wrench and the floor made a hollow sound. When they removed the floorboards, they discovered a stone staircase descending into darkness, a narrow passage leading downward. At the end, an iron door. The key was in a hidden hollow in the wall. When they opened the door, they saw a long tunnel, hundreds of meters long, leading toward the old chapel area. At the end of the tunnel was a small room, and there, on a thin mattress on the ground, lay an elderly woman, very thin, very pale, but alive. She was clutching a rosary made from wood scraps. Her eyes opened, and she saw the police. Her voice came out very weak. Sister Catherine Vale. Father Marcus's heart stopped. After 28 years, his sister had been found. In the corner of the room was a second skeleton on an old mattress. Probably Sister Beatrice, who had died years ago. The ambulance came, took Catherine to the hospital. Victor Blackwood was arrested. Terrible truths found in his diary. His mother abandoning him to become a nun, his grandmother's religious violence. He had developed a pathological hatred of nuns. In 1980, he had committed his planned crime, drugging the 4 nuns' tea and kidnapping them, keeping them in underground chambers. The first 2 elderly nuns died in the first year. Beatrice lasted 10 years. Only Catherine had survived for 28 years. At the hospital, Father Marcus visited his sister in protective clothing. For the first time in 28 years. Catherine's eyes still had that old light, the light of faith. Her first words were unforgettable. God never abandoned me, brother. This woman had spent 28 years in darkness, but had not lost her soul. Her first question was not about her own condition, but about the state of the church. Is the church still strong, she had asked. Father Marcus had smiled and answered, the gates of hell could not prevail against it. Catherine's story was a miracle, proof of the power of the human spirit. Even in the midst of darkness, she had managed to keep her hope. She had decorated the walls with religious figures, made her rosary from wood scraps, prayed every day. The details in Victor's diary were horrifying. He had planned for years, learned the nuns' routines, knew they would be alone during the retreat. He had drugged their tea to incapacitate them, then carried them to the underground chamber under cover of night. What happened to Catherine could happen to any of us. Sometimes even the places we trust most are not safe. Sometimes even our closest neighbor can hide dark secrets. But Catherine's story teaches us that faith can be light even in the darkest moments. What would you do, 28 years in darkness, alone, abandoned? Would you lose your faith, or would you keep your hope like Catherine? The answer to this question lies within all of us. Father Marcus is holding his sister's hand now. The 28-year search has ended, but some wounds will take longer to heal. Catherine's recovery will take time. Victor's trial will continue. But most importantly, a miracle has occurred. The lost was found, darkness was defeated by light, and faith prevailed. This story reminds us that we should never give up. Sometimes, even in the most impossible situations, there is hope. And sometimes, even after 28 years, answers come. Father Marcus now knows that his prayers were not in vain. His sister was found, the truth came out, and Catherine's first words still echo in his ears. God never abandoned me. This is a word we should never forget. No matter how dark it gets, no matter how hopeless it seems, faith always finds a way.